Barbara Goldowsky with her book Immigrant Dreams.
Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for letting me zoom into the East Hampton Library. Thank you very much to the library, to Stephen Spataro, tonight's host, who graciously invited me and is moderating this talk tonight. And thank you all for tuning in. It's wonderful. I was going to say it's wonderful to see so many people in one place, but I will say so many people on one screen. So thank you all for coming. It is very kind of you and very special for me. We'll be talking about Immigrant Dreams, my memoir published last August. And I'll just like to say, I really feel I've come home. The East Hampton Library and I and my family have a long association since the mid-1970s when my children were young and we had a house on Mill Hill Lane, which the locals will know is right around the corner from the library. It was one of our favorite destinations, and I well remember going downstairs to the children's room when it was in the basement before the splendid new addition that has been built since. But my grandchildren have enjoyed the new addition before I moved away in 2016. I also remember teaching a Taproot Writers Workshop here at the library and entering the poetry contest several times. And once I even won, yay. Some of you may remember some of the things I did while I lived in the Hamptons. I was writing for the Southampton Press, feature articles, book reviews, theater reviews, and once in a while when Fred Faulkner couldn't do it, music reviews. I was also producing and hosting radio shows on WPBX, which was then at Southampton College, what was Long Island University on the Southampton campus. My first venture there on WPBX was Poets Corner Live. It was a Sunday morning show on which I interviewed local poets. They read their work, we talked about it, and the poets had an opportunity to mention, where they might be appearing or a recent book or whatever they had to talk about and promote. It came to be a well-regarded show and it ran for several years. And then while I was doing that, I became interested in being a classical music DJ. So I took the training and then I was able to have a weekday afternoon program of classical music. I really enjoy chamber music, so I used to feature that very much. It was in those days when there were no CDs and we had vinyl records that clicked and popped, and you had to be sort of on your toes to make sure that everything went smoothly. I really did enjoy my radio days. And then in 1989, as Stephen mentioned, I got involved with Piano Fest in the Hamptons. I've stayed associated with them ever since. I no longer have a formal job with them, but I am in touch with them. It's 30 plus years. They have celebrated their 30th anniversary before the pandemic hit. Sorry about that noise. I've been trying for months to shut that off and I can't figure out how to do it. But little did I know in 1989 that Piano Fest, which was a very little festival at the time, would turn into this world-class event with Piano Fest alumni now teaching at prestigious conservatories and having worldwide concert careers. I hope for them that their concert careers will start up again soon. Sadly, as we all know, everything was canceled last year. I did hear that Piano Fest is working on a short season in August this year. I'm sure it will be announced and I'm sure you'll be very happy to welcome them back. Now, besides writing for the newspaper and doing all this other stuff, I did manage to publish some short stories and poems in various venues. And I read at Caneos. I attended all the events at Caneos that I could, and at some other venues. I even did some readings on LTV. If anyone remembers the rather unusual read-through we had of Anna Karenina, of all things, on LTV, I took part in that, and I did enjoy that also. I think the library has some previous books by me, and if not, I will be happy to send you some. I'm sorry, I need to use notes. My memorizing is not as good as it used to be. I left East Hampton in the spring of 2016 after my husband, Norman Pickering, died. That was late in 2015. He had reached the astonishing age of 99 years and 4 months. What a life the man had. And I'm sure many of you remember him. Musician, scientist, all-around genius, Norman Pickering. He had many, many friends, as well as family in the Hamptons. But because my children and my grandchildren all live in the Boston area and have lived here since they left home to go to college, I decided it was better for me to move to be near them rather than staying all by myself in the Hamptons. It would not have been good for me, I don't think. And it's proved to be a good decision. What I did was I moved to a senior community, which is associated with the university, LaSalle University. It's in Newton, about 45 minutes from downtown Boston. And it's a very lively place, intellectually stimulating. I have been happy here, and I can tell you more about that later if you wish. Well, this evening is about the book, so we should be talking about the book. Well, Stephen has shown you a picture, but here we are. I finished the book during lockdown last year, 2020. And I will say it kept me from fidgeting too much. It kept me out of trouble. I always had something to do. Now, it is a memoir, some but not all of my life experience, as seen from the perspective of an immigrant. I was 14 years old when I arrived from Germany with my mother and my younger brother. That was in 1950. And that will also tell you that English is not my first language. You know, when you get to be a certain age, your family and your friends say, "Oh my, you have had an interesting life. Really, you ought to write that down. You know, your children will thank you, your grandchildren will thank you. You really should write it down." Well, my family did say that, and many people encouraged me, and I would always answer, okay, I will do it someday. I said, memoir writing is for old people. I'll do it when I'm old. I'll do it when I'm 80, I said. I said that. I didn't really mean it, truth to tell. I wasn't very motivated to write my life story. Although I knew that my life, starting in Germany and living through World War II there, certainly had unusual events in it, all those turbulent times. And I thought my family would be interested. On the other hand, they had heard a lot of the stories from my mother and from me. And as for the general reading public out there, another old lady penning her charming memoir, I was not so sure. There are many such stories, so World War II stories, and mine was not as dramatic, I thought. And I know it's not as horrifying, thankfully, as others. Over time, I did write a few autobiographical pieces, and some were published. And the war and its aftermath found its way into my poetry. But I let it go at that. I let it go until I was 80, as I had promised, and then a little longer. I let it go until the presidential election of 2016. And then, shortly after that, when we began to see the hate against immigrants, the poisonous hate, being officially put out by the administration, the Muslim ban, the wall being built to keep out asylum seekers and refugees from violence, the mothers and fathers trying to hold on to their children as Border Patrol agents dragged them away screaming, the children in cages, the daily news became unbearable. It made me more than despondent. It made me angry. It made me furious. It made me frustrated because I felt so powerless. I really became almost ill physically. I couldn't sleep and my thoughts went around in circles and circles. I was profoundly depressed. And then one day, I walked past a picture of my husband, Norman, that hangs in my bedroom over there. I pass that photo several times every day because I go in and out of that room. It's also the room in which I work. And I give Norman a little wave and a smile. And sometimes I say something really stupid like, "Hello, old goat." But this time, I suddenly heard Norman's voice speaking in my head. And I heard what he would say about my current predicament, rather sternly. "You have a problem," he would have said. "All right. State the problem, and then don't just sit there and stew about it. Do something. Take action. Take action, even a small step." Now, it was something he had often said, and I had taken his advice in the past. So I took a deep breath. "Thank you, Norman." And I asked myself what action I could take. Now, I am too old to rush to the border and to offer my services as a volunteer. I do not speak Spanish. I don't have any money to contribute. I am not an immigration lawyer. I'm not any kind of a lawyer. So what action could I take? I thought about my brother and me coming to the US in 1950 and how we found a new life, a life that had people of different racial and ethnic and religious backgrounds in it. You know, in Germany, I had never met a Jewish person. The Jewish children who should have been my classmates had been banished from the public schools I went to. They had to attend special schools. Possibly their rabbis taught them. The families who were fortunate enough to have left were gone. And the ones remaining, sadly, were taken away to meet their tragic fate. I literally did not know that there were other religions in the world besides Christianity. I thought there were only Lutherans and Catholics. Now, my brother and I were baptized Lutherans, but we both admired the colorful processions that the Catholics had on Saints' Days. We rather envied those. Then in Chicago, where my family settled with relatives, later we gradually found acceptance and opportunity. We learned the language. I thought of how different our story might be if it happened now, and if we happened to come not from Germany, but from South America, say, or from Asia, or from Africa, and how different it would be if we were people of color. Of course, it would be radically different. I decided that the action I could take was to write. I thought, I can write our story, and I can reaffirm that America is a nation of immigrants, and that immigrants become a valuable part of their community that brings freshness, different traditions, and different approaches to life, not to mention all the delicious foods that turn up when a new ethnic group moves in. So in the spring of 2018, I sat down in earnest to write the introduction and chapter 1. In parentheses, I should say that I would have started earlier in 2017, but suddenly, very unexpectedly, I was diagnosed with a serious illness, lymphoma. And that meant a long course of chemotherapy and radiation and then rehab. And fortunately, it took me a year and a half to recover, but fortunately I did. And here I am, and you can imagine that I give thanks for that every single day. So 2018, I started writing. I made an outline of what the main points should be and how far into my life the story should go. After all, a story needs to have a shape, a plot, if you like. I did not set out to chronicle my entire life to date. That would be way too much information. You don't need that much. I wanted to tell about being a young immigrant, and about acquiring learning and about writing in English, the language I have come to love. And I wanted my story to be exciting and suspenseful, like a novel or maybe a soap opera. If I only sat down, if I just sat down and wrote, then I did this and then I did that and then I met so-and-so. Well, that's important for a journal, and I'm not denigrating that sort of writing at all, but it's not a story yet. Reading somebody else's notes is boring to the average reader. I have to confess I do not keep a journal, but once you have, journal entries and you want to make a book out of them, it's another process. Unless you're one of those super gifted souls who sits down and writes something and everything comes out absolutely perfect. Too bad, I'm not one of those. I was lucky to find a writing consultant here, a retired professor of literature and humanities at LaSalle University that's associated with this community, who offers writing and editing support through our village's education department. We have one. It's like going back to school here. This was particularly wonderful because our classes and educational programs do not cost extra. My mentor's name is Becky Kennedy, and she has been immensely helpful to this project. Thanks to her, I was able to write a chapter or two at a time and to discuss them with her as I went along. This made it possible to get the manuscript edited and in pretty good shape as I wrote, instead of my putting it all down and then having a huge pile of edits and rewrites to do at the end. I don't think I would have done a good job of that. For one thing, I was tired. I was even tired of my own words. But as it happened, in the end, I did rewrite much of the first 6 chapters because I found when I got all the way to the end that my style had changed somehow, I hope for the better. And I also had received suggestions from several readers besides Becky who had read early chapters of the manuscript. Then I was extremely fortunate in 2019 to reconnect with David Lee Rubin, who is Professor Emeritus of French at the University of Virginia and an independent publisher. David and I met, believe it or not, in 1957 at the University of Chicago, where we both worked for the Chicago Review, the literary magazine. It was just as the Beat generation of writers and poets was stirring things up and making a lot of trouble. David and I lost touch after leaving the university, and it wasn't until 2019, after the Chicago Review had accepted part of this book, the chapters dealing with Chicago Review, for publication in a special issue of the review that was dedicated to the memoirs of past editors. David Rubin wrote to me, we renewed our friendship, and when he heard I was writing Immigrant Dreams, he offered to read and to comment on the manuscript. And of course, I shamelessly took advantage of his generous offer. He has made so many helpful, insightful, and constructive suggestions, which I've used throughout the book. And then he was kind enough to write lovely words of praise for the finished book. You can read his comment on the back cover. So thank you, David. I hope you're here. We have not managed to see one another in person yet, but our virtual reunion is being celebrated herewith. So I worked all that year on Immigrant Dreams, and by January 2020, last year, I was nearly done. I kept saying the next chapter I write is going to be the last. Was not, many a time. But finally the time came. And sometime last March, I did write the last chapter. Just a little more than a year ago. I was very focused. I wrote every day. Sometimes I thought I was really going on too long. Now the book is long, but readers have been kind enough to say it reads fast. And some have said they couldn't put it down, which is my very favorite comment of all time. Thank you so much for saying that. As I got close to the end and knew how many chapters and approximately how many words there would be, I started hunting for publishers. My earlier books were self-published, and I have been happy with that. But I thought, this is a big book. Wouldn't it be nice if a royalty publisher picked it up? I thought it was a book relevant to the times, immigration remaining a constant topic. And even though my circumstances were different back in 1950, this book is about more than my personal journey. I did the research. I spent much time on the internet. I wrote many query letters. There was much asking around of other writers and academics I know here. There are many very accomplished people here, so I've had good resources. Then I was lucky enough to find a firm in Chicago that agreed to read a proposal, not the manuscript, mind you, but a proposal, which is an important first step. So I got the guidelines. I worked diligently on the book synopsis and the author description and all the supporting material you're supposed to give them. Among other things, this firm requires you to make a list of competing books in the same field on the same subject and to explain how your book differs from them. And then you're supposed to tell them why your book will sell better than the others, or at least as well. A tall order for sure. So I spent a lot more time on the internet, specifically on Amazon. I should add that I wanted to work without an agent. That takes a lot of time and it involves a whole other round of research. And I was concerned about time. As you know, I'm not 23 anymore. I do feel time passing. The Chicago firm did not require an agent. Some do, some don't. And you have to sort out whom to approach before you go that way. But when I had the proposal ready, I sent it, including the first 3 chapters as requested, and I began to wait while continuing to look around at publishing websites and other books that I liked that might possibly give me a clue. And I wrote more query letters too. This was at the end of January 2020. I waited. No word came from Chicago, but I figured that's normal. You don't get answers right away. It takes months. But then came March 2020. And we all know what happened next. Gigantic stop sign to everyone's life. Pandemic. By the middle of March, we had coronavirus cases rising to horrendous numbers. And suddenly life changed for all of us. Who does not remember that? We all remember that. Now we went into quarantine. Here at LaSalle Village, we have independent apartments. Also, there's an assisted living floor and a nursing home floor. And everyone was quarantined. I have my own apartment, a very nice one, on the 3rd floor of a building. It's sunny and bright with the southern exposure, and my orchid plants by the window over there, just love it. So do I. As far as staying home went, I was not too unhappy. I had work to do. I was absolutely determined to get this book done and finished and published. But it was a little eerie. There was no more going down to the dining hall or the cafeteria, no more shuttle bus to the local supermarket, no more using the libraries in our various buildings, and we have some nice ones, and no more sitting in classes with teachers and students in the same room. None of that. Also, at first, my kids could not visit because we all had stay-home orders. That was the sad part. They lived close by. And of course, we wore masks. We still do now, although some of the rules are being relaxed. But that year, as you remember, was the time of lockdown. I stayed home in my apartment, continued to concentrate on finding a publisher, and I wrote some short pieces for a writer's workshop class that was continuing remotely. I'm used to working alone, and it seems I need a lot of alone time, even in normal times, so I did not go crazy. Our management got very creative and provided classes, including exercise classes, yoga and Tai Chi, all either over Zoom or over our closed circuit TV station, which existed already. And people learned to use Zoom and Skype and FaceTime, and suddenly all the grandmas were making video calls to their grandchildren, learning new things. I waited for the publisher in Chicago to make a decision. April came. I decided I'd waited long enough. I was impatient. Now I know you're not supposed to bother these people. You're not supposed to inquire or call up and say, what about my manuscript? However, I did it anyway, using the pandemic as an excuse. I sent a polite email to ask, was there any decision on Immigrant Dreams? And the answer, again, very quickly came back after my waiting several months, but it was no. The firm would not accept the manuscript, they said. They were not making any acquisitions due to the economic situation, which everyone knew was dire. It reassured me a little bit. At least they didn't say your manuscript is terrible, whoever told you you could write. But it was the economic situation, and no wonder. Bookstores were closed. There were no book fairs, no book tours. No wonder this publisher was pulling back. I understood, of course, but it was a disappointment. I had thought Chicago, where I spent so much of my youth and young adulthood, would have been a great place to publish this. The lockdown continued. I did more research. I wrote more query letters. I looked into self-publishing options. There are quite a number of those, from high-end services to total do-it-yourself schemes. One thing I was not going to do, I was not going to wait more years to find a publisher. So I talked more with friends and family, endlessly brainstorming. And then I did something I never thought I would do. I put one of my query letters on Facebook. For years, I'd resisted Facebook and social media. I thought, it was trivial. I thought it was just a marketplace for gossip. I thought this is where people tell each other what they had for lunch and what their pets are doing. But I thought a little self-promotion, especially now that we can't go out to bookstores and make personal contacts, why not? It doesn't cost anything. So I joined Facebook and I tried to familiarize myself with how it works. And guess what? I found quite a lot of self-promotion, especially on the part of performing artists, but also visual artists, people who make artistic clothing, photographers, any number of people. And so I posted my letter. It described the book and my journey, and it said, the manuscript is available, and I am looking for a Immigrant Dreams, the American Dream. Now, it says your internet connection is unstable. Well, please stay stable. Because I now want to tell you about dreams coming true. By the end of June, I had a contract. I had been discovered. I was discovered by a friend who lives in the Hamptons and who saw my post and who was then generous enough to recommend me to the publisher who had just published her book. The interesting thing is that I'd known this person for quite a while, but I did not know she had a recent book out, so I had not asked her for advice. But here she was, and the publisher, TBR Books, based in New York, might be interested in my manuscript, she said. Now, how wonderful is that? Yes, it is wonderful. From then on, things moved very fast. The book was accepted and proofread and published and on the market by the end of August. It was astounding. I've never seen any publishing venture move that fast. I am so grateful to my friend and to the people at TBR who made this all possible. And now the book is available from the publisher TBR and from all the usual online stores like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and from your local bookstore, which is really a very good and recommended way to order books because we must support independent booksellers as well as independent authors. I will brag a little though. I have received 2 5-star reviews on Amazon. And thank you very much to the people who did those. They were unsolicited. I did not ask them. And I hope that if you choose to read the book, you will leave an honest comment. It does not have to be a rave. Just tell me what you think. I am really interested. In a minute, I'll read some sections of the book, but I want to take just a minute to say what TBR stands for. TBR, the Bilingual Revolution. It is the publishing arm of a nonprofit organization called the Center for the Advancement of Language, Education, and Communities. They have a special interest in multicultural stories, cultural and bilingual education, and social initiatives. They run a great many programs in aid of bilingual education, notably in French, because the head of the firm and his wife are French. And TBR's books are translated into many languages because that is part of their mission. So thank you again to TBR publishers. All right, we have time, I think, for me to read from the book. I will start with the introduction, and we can go on from there as time allows. Give me a moment to put down my papers and to pick up the book. Research notes. So here's the introduction. I am an immigrant born in Germany under a dictatorship. As I write this memoir, I hope not to die under another one. When I began writing this book in 2018, my worst fear was that the United States would let itself slide into autocracy. Sadly, in 2020, this fear still haunts me. That was before the election of 2020. But I also hope. I place my hope in the country that made many of my immigrant dreams come true. The United States that allowed me to become a citizen of a free, religiously and ethnically diverse country. I love and admire the United States that gave me the opportunity to acquire education as the first step toward making a living. A chance to meet people of different ancestry and culture, and most of all, the joy of knowing my children and grandchildren would never have to live under an evil regime like Adolf Hitler's. I place my hope in the strength of the United States Constitution and in the honest civil servants and public officials who have sworn to uphold and defend it. I place my hope in the continued courage of the members of the free press who brave personal danger to report the facts, the real facts, not the alternative ones, and to expose abuses, hate speech, and complaisance. On a personal level, I place my hopes in my children and my grandchildren. To the best of my ability, I want to give them an understanding of what the American dream means to me and how to carry on as informed citizens who care about ideals, freedom, inclusion, compassion, and government that serves the people instead of trying to dominate and subdue them. The story of every life is both fairy tale and mystery. Facts provided by parents may or may not be verifiable. Even birth certificates can lie. Mine did, ascribing pure Aryan parentage to a bastard child whose true father remained unnamed. My stories honor the memory of my loving, courageous, often unconventional mother, and the memory of my beloved brother, who lived a life committed to leaving the world a better place than he found it. He did do that. Some of the anecdotes in these narratives were told to me by my mother in great detail, and others in outline. For some, I have invented dialogue that is consistent with her voice and favorite idioms, and the names of a few persons have been altered to protect their privacy. Now, I feel better about immigration, although I realize that the problem is not solved by any means. It is a huge problem, but I do believe that the present administration is fair and has a sense of compassion. Some of the families that were severed are being reunited now, and I believe there is goodwill and an honest effort. It will take a long time to really deal with this situation, but I do have hope now. So now I can go on to chapter 1. Is that all right, Stephen? Okay.
That's sure.
Okay.
Perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you. All right, the first chapter is called Wise Child. My mother had 4 husbands. None of them was my father. I did not learn this intriguing fact until I was a teenager, living in Chicago with mother and my brother, my half-brother, another fact of life I hadn't known. It's a wise child that knows its own father, says the proverb. Tell me who is endowed with such wisdom. Born in 1902 in a village near Karlsruhe, Germany, my mother had a conventional middle-class upbringing. Her father was the Bäckermeister, the master baker, whose shop supplied bread to almost every household in town. My mother was the third of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, close together in age and all baptized in the Lutheran faith. When the children got to be 6 or 7 years old, they were required to help with the business, delivering fresh rolls to customers before breakfast. Getting up at dawn in all kinds of weather, climbing dark flights of stairs with no tips or thanks, convinced all 4 siblings not to learn the family business. All 4 kept their resolve. When my mother, decades later, married a man who happened to be a retired baker, she said, "My mother is sitting up there in heaven laughing her head off. Now I finally married a baker, like she always told us girls to do." My mother's stories about her youth described a contented family in which the children completed daily chores and did their homework before going out to play, and everyone went to church on Sunday. This tranquil unit was drastically disrupted when my mother was in her early teens. She and her siblings did not understand why the family's routine suddenly changed. Instead of attending the Lutheran church, parents and children now went to services held by the New Apostolic Christians, a stern fundamentalist sect that emphasized serious prayer and forbade frivolous pursuits. At home, there was no more singing of traditional German ballads after supper. Dance lessons for the older children were canceled. Under my grandmother's new discipline, work and chores continued as usual. Evenings were either gloomy with silence or loud with terrifying visits from grim-faced brethren who preached about the wages of sin, sometimes ranting on in incomprehensible tongues. Mother, who loved laughter and gaiety, hated this new lifestyle. While her siblings meekly, if glumly, accepted the stark dogma, she rebelled. By the time she was 16 and was under pressure to study for her already overdue confirmation, her courageous spirit woke up. It stretched and swung into a dance step. In spite of her mother's shock and censure, my mother refused to be confirmed. The church elders threatened her with hellfire. Mother stood her ground. She was formally excommunicated. Her mother wept. It would be many years before my mother learned what had caused her mother to embrace the grim rituals of the new apostolic Christians. It had to do with a love child, my mother related. There was a young housemaid. My father got her pregnant. It was hushed up, but my mother turned bitter. I don't think she ever got over the pain. My mother was a talented seamstress. She had dreamed of studying dress design in Paris. Her parents would not allow it, insisting on a secretarial school instead. And after that, you'll find a proper job for a young woman, her mother decreed. My mother enrolled in the business college, but after graduating, she left home and moved to the nearby city of Darmstadt on her own to study vegetarian cooking, Rohkost, which is raw food, and the teachings of Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, the philosophy that strives to combine science and mysticism. Her openness and sense of adventure led her to other young people, Christian and Jewish, who explored Eastern religions, liberal politics, and pacifism. She became a vegetarian. Think of it, my mother said. By the time I was 20, I'd lived through the First World War, a major inflation, and the influenza pandemic of 1918. My brother Carl came back from the war, World War I, with terrible injuries. He had lost his right eye. I was not alone, she reminded us. Many families suffered. It made people pay attention to books like Die Waffen nieder, it means lay down your arms, by Bertha von Suttner. I joined the peace movement in Germany, my mother said. We wanted a better world, a more spiritual world. We all read Tagore. The Indian poet and guru Rabindranath Tagore had received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. He was the first Asian to do so. Photos from the 1920s show my mother as a perfect flapper, small and gracefully built with a mischievous face. She looked good in hats. If color photography had been available then, pictures would have shown eyes that were exactly the color of her aquamarine ring. And she had chosen that stone because her astrological sign was Aquarius. Those eyes were admired throughout her life. Men fell at her feet. Sometime during that turbulent decade, my mother married husband number 1. He remains a mystery. Mother never told me how they met or whether she had loved him. She did say that she had found herself in an alien world after the marriage. Her husband had money and spent it lavishly. There were vacations in Paris, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. My mother was given a pricey red sports car, an Adler. She was driving alone on a Swiss mountain road when a collision with a bus wrecked the car, but fortunately it did not injure her. For the rest of her life, she did not want to drive a car. I don't know if she ever had any driving lessons. Why did my mother marry this playboy who died young and left her to care for a demented mother-in-law? My best guess is that mother had longed for a child. The marriage did not produce one. Mother had a cousin in Munich who was married to a businessman. In 1934, after the death of her husband, mother wrote to her cousin and asked if the family firm could offer her a job in the office. For once, she was glad of her business training. Cousin Rosa agreed, and the young widow escaped to Bavaria. How did she meet my father? Who was he? How could she not know that he was married to another woman when she became pregnant with me? In November 1936, my mother bore a love child. We wanted you. You were longed for and welcome, my mother said when she told me the story years later. Your father and I were overjoyed. We promised to love you and each other always and forever. Mother remained true to her vow. Hans, the only name she ever gave, and who knows if it was his real one, remained the love of her life. On her deathbed at almost 90, happily married to husband number 4, Mother told me in the moment we had alone together, I will see your father now. He is just beyond that door. The smile on her face was that of a young woman head over heels in love for the first time. Who was my birth father? He loved walking in the country, Mother said. He was educated and witty. He wanted a child to complete their love. Was he Christian and Jewish? Why had he concealed his marriage? Who was his legal wife? Why was there no divorce? I do not know. When my mother learned from a mutual friend that Hans was already married, she sent her lover away. He disappeared, not only from her life, but from that of his friends. After 1936, no one heard from him. Because of that disappearance, I now believe my father was a Jew. My mother refused to confirm or deny it. To the very end of her life, she revealed no personal details about Hans. She never stopped guarding the secret that in Nazi Germany could have killed us. I was born on November 11, 1936, in the picturesque medieval town of Dachau, Bavaria, not in the infamous concentration camp. Since the 19th century, Dachau had been an artists' and writers' colony. By order of Heinrich Himmler, the Nazi chief of police, the camp took over the grounds of a dismantled gunpowder and munitions factory on a lonely stretch of moorland which is a few kilometers from the town center. When she came to work for her cousin's business, Mother rented rooms in the home of a well-known landscape painter. And a contemporary guidebook of Dachau has named the street after him. The painter's wife befriended the young woman in trouble and attended my birth along with the midwife. Ironically, Bavaria was not an early stronghold of the Nazi Party. In fact, for a brief time, a communist state-led government declared itself a Soviet republic of Bavaria. Imagine. The first prisoners incarcerated in the Dachau camp were communists. In 1936, Adolf Hitler had been in power for 3 years and had turned Germany into a monolithic police state. Jewish artists, scientists, and intellectuals fled or were expelled, beginning in 1933 when Hitler came to power. The Nuremberg laws defined who was a German Aryan with a right to live and who was a Jew or who had Jewish blood and was no longer a citizen. Illegitimate children without provable lineage for generations past were at high risk. My mother's pedigree was no problem, but unless a father with proper credentials was named, my mother was warned, she would be a criminal in violation of the 1935 law that was for the protection of German blood and German honor. Mother never named my birth father, not then, not ever. All right. Would you like me to stop here and answer questions, or what shall we do?
Does anyone at the present time have any questions for Barbara, or any comments, or if you'd like, you could type in the chat, or if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, I will unmute the microphone. Or if while we have the mics open, if you just want to unmute and ask a question, the ability to do so has been enabled. We don't have any questions at the moment. Oh, we do have a question. Robert?
Yes, hi. Hi, Barbara. How are you?
Hello,
It's
good to
so
see
good
you.
to see you. I, my question is not nearly as interesting as the story you're reading us, but
Thank you.
I do wonder, do you still commune with your mother today? Think of her, and I'm sure you do. But does she offer any advice? Is she any clearer with you about the kind of world we face today?
Well, my
And,
mother,
what wisdom does she have for you and for us?
yeah. Right now, communion with her is from the spirit world because my mother passed away in 1991.
Of course, of course. I'm thinking almost of like
Yeah,
prayers.
right. She talked a lot about my father and how much she loved him, but she never really explained, why she didn't know that he was married and why she had to find out from someone else. And she would never answer any questions about his being Jewish or not. And she would say, doesn't matter, or let's talk about something else. So I'm no clearer about that, my origins.
Yes.
But my mother had many stories and she was a wonderful storyteller. My children remember things she said and jokes she made. And of course, along with cookies she baked.
I guess I was kind of thinking of her as the prototypical survivor, and
Yes,
sort of more in line with any wisdom or either verbally, or by her example,
mhm.
um, of in terms of what we all seem to be facing today. What solace do you take from your mother?
I think of her sense of humor. She had wonderful Nazi jokes. And she often said that, if you lose the ability to laugh, you will die right away because we need to, to see the ridiculousness of everything. And she was an optimist. She would say, all right, it's going to be hard for a few years and we will do what we have to do. But in the end, we have a goal and we need to do this. She was very, very focused on education. She wanted us children to go to school and to learn English and to go to university, which I managed to do. My brother did not. My brother became an artist and a wonderful craftsman. But, she had definite goals, but she was also very liberal. I mean, some people have asked me what she thought of some of my escapades that I tell about in the book. And I will say she never actually criticized me very much. She said, so if you love this guy, you'll have to do what you have to do.
We have a question. Andrew asks, hello, did you regret not having a journal to call upon when writing?
Well, sometimes I had to look up dates and things. I've never taken to writing diaries. I don't know why that is, but thanks to Google, I could look up dates when certain things happened that I know I was present, but I did not remember the exact April day of the liberation of the Dachau camp, for instance.
We have another person has a request asking, please read more. If you'd like to
Sure.
maybe do another excerpt, and we have one from Kalek TBR Books says, "Bravo, Barbara," and
Thank you. Bravo
it's
to that.
great.
All right. I will take a minute to have a sip of tea and then I will
Sure, wonderful.
read about my brother. Yeah. All right, we can We're skipping to 1942. Hitler has started his war in 1939. When I was 3, I did not know there was a war on. So this is chapter 3, called "The Stork Brings My Brother." The early 1940s found the family in Alsace-Lorraine, renamed Westmark by Hitler's government. At age 4, I had no idea why we had moved from Dachau to this new place called Saarburg. I remember meeting the shy little boy who lived next door. When he was coaxed to say hello, I didn't understand the word he was saying. His name was Jeannot, and Mother explained that he was speaking French. "He will have to learn German," she added, "then you can talk." It was all very mysterious, but no further explanation followed. Adults expected you to accept situations as they were and not pester them with questions. What understanding I have of the complex history of Alsace and Lorraine, as the territory endured multiple wars between France and Germany in the past 100 years, came much later. When Hitler started his war of conquest, the provinces west of the Rhine were French. After the fall of France in 1940, Nazi troops marched in and occupied them. In 1942, the inhabitants were declared German citizens, so they could be drafted into Hitler's army, where these conscripted soldiers called themselves the Malgré nous, which means against our will. The Alsatian and French languages were forbidden. Learning German was mandatory. Our family was there because August, I have acquired a stepfather now, who I think is my real father. His name was August, as in Augustus. Our family was there because August had been ordered by his Nazi superiors to set up a blueprinting shop. He was not in the army. His experience as a draftsman in the Dachau Department of Buildings, or perhaps it was called Public Works, was considered essential to the war effort, so he was told to move. I did not understand any of this then, of course. As time went on, I pieced together snippets of family history from Mother. We lived on the main business street of Saarburg. The shop was in the back of the house. In the front room, which had large picture windows, Mother set up a gallery and sold paintings and drawings created by her artist friends in Munich and Dachau. Though my mother was part of the occupation, her outgoing personality made her business quite successful. She had some tourist French acquired during her previous cosmopolitan life, and there were families that spoke German as a result of intermarriages in the past, as the Alsatian territories were passed from France to Germany and back again. Mother was good at making friends in any language. If she had met the Grinch, she would have invited him to Christmas dinner, fed him Glühwein, and charmed him out of stealing the holiday. Jeannot learned a few words of German. I learned a few words of French. We chased each other around the courtyard. Soldiers in formation marched down the street regularly, their eyes fixed strictly forward, following the red, white, and black swastika banners. They were marching to the front, we were told. We could not visualize this faraway destination. We did not know why they were marching. How could we possibly comprehend that their leader was a madman, a murderer, who would destroy millions of lives during his bloody reign of terror? We waved at the soldiers. They did not wave back. War was a word we heard every day. Fortunately for us, the actual shooting and bombing were far away at this time. Although foodstuffs were rationed, we had enough to eat. Imported goods like coffee and sugar became increasingly rare. Housewives became adept at substitutes. I remember the delicious nutty aroma of roasted chicory, the ersatz coffee. We had milk for the children, bread from the bakery, and even fresh eggs from a flock of chickens Mother kept in a walled section of the garden. I did not like the chickens. Every time I was asked to feed them, the rooster flew at me, his sharp claws outstretched at my eye level. Much as I hated him, though, I still refused to eat when he was served up for dinner. Fruit trees grew in the garden, apples, pears, and small yellow plums called mirabelle. These intensely sweet plums are the major agricultural product of the Alsace-Moselle region, and they're used to make jelly and liqueurs. I filched as many as I could reach or shake down from the tree. Since there was no refrigeration, meat, when available, came fresh from the butcher. It appeared rarely, and the largest portions were given to the men. Fatih was my stepfather, and Ernst, his son, my stepbrother, whose teenage appetite would have taken care of the entire roast if it had been allowed. Alsace is a wine-growing region. The neighbor ladies encouraged my mother to drink a liter of red wine every day while she was pregnant with my brother. For iron, they said. A moderate drinker, mother laughed heartily whenever she told this story. Ha, maybe they wanted to get rid of me in a nice way, she joked. The war that was raging through Europe dominated the news, but amazingly enough, it had caused only minimal hardship to the family as yet. News of the war came over the radio via the official government-controlled channel. Listening to foreign stations was verboten. I did not understand much of what I was hearing. Hitler's harsh, barking voice sounded just like Fatih's and frightened me as badly. I did not like my stepfather. I heard the words Poland, Russia, without understanding the atrocities occurring at those places. When the grown-ups wanted to discuss politics, I was sent to my room. Because I heard it so often, I remember the main message of every newscast. German forces were winning every battle, on every front. The Führer was invincible. The radio announcers would repeat this right to the end. Growing up in the midst of this Nazi country, I must have heard the word Jude, Jew, but at the time it meant nothing to me, shielded as I was by mother. The children I knew were either Catholic or Protestant. There were no Jewish children for me to meet. The Jewish population of Alsace-Lorraine had been expelled by Hitler's regime. The Bible stories Tante, that's my great aunt who raised me along with my mother. The Bible stories mentioned Jews, but to me they were historical. They were Old Testament figures far in the past. I did not understand that in a peaceful world, I would have had Jewish contemporaries. I was not to meet a Jewish person until we emigrated. Mother had had Jewish friends before the war. She never told me their stories if she knew them, and she did not talk about the tragedies that she knew were happening and that she was powerless now to prevent. She was trapped. The price for her security was silence. You see, she had married a Nazi sympathizer, and that gave me proper credentials. I am sure August was as anti-Semitic as the rest of his cronies, but he did not rant in front of me. I know now that mother restrained him, undaunted by his evil temper. It was a brave stance because he had the power to denounce her. He could have gone to his Nazi bosses and said, "My wife tricked me. She has a bastard Jew child and made me think it was mine." They would have believed the party member. Perhaps having his own little son with her gave him a bit more patience. Perhaps he even loved her. Sometimes mother talked about how things used to be in Frieden before the war. I could not imagine peace. Mother's stories sounded like tall tales. For instance, who could believe in city streets so bright with electric lights that you could read a newspaper? I knew that the streets were dark and that our house and all the others in the neighborhood were blacked out with heavy drapes as soon as the sun set. Going out at night was unthinkable as well as forbidden. Mother was inventing fantasies, I thought, but I didn't mind. I liked stories. In 1942, I was still young enough to believe in fairy tales. Hansel and Gretel were smart, resourceful children who kicked the witch into the fire. Sleeping Beauty's prince kissed her, and she awoke to live happily ever after. Max and Moritz, wicked boys, who ended up ground up to bone meal between millstones. And the stork brought babies. It was easy to believe in the stork. I saw the storks every day, right across the street from our upstairs living room window. On the roof of the bakery, snug against the chimney, their stick nest housed eggs, hatchlings, and the adults in their elegant black and white plumage. They stood taller than I was at 5.5. One parent remained on guard while the other went fishing in a nearby weir. Nobody bothered them. They brought good luck. That summer, Mother asked me which I would like better, a little sister or a brother. Oh, I wanted a brother, a little brother, someone my size, who would play with me. Not some near adult like my stepbrother, who talked about motorcycles and race cars but was never home. I'd teach the little guy to become a racing driver like me, cornering without flipping over as I practiced it daily with my doll carriage. You know about the stork, Mother asked? Yes, I do, but how do we get him to come? Mother said he would stop by if he saw some sugar on the windowsill. Aha, that was something I could do all by myself. Left alone to play, I sneaked into the pantry, took the bag of sugar up to my room, and set it on the narrow brick ledge outside the window in full view of the stork's flight path. In the afternoon, I heard Helene, our housemaid, wheezing loudly as she came running upstairs. I was surprised because she normally walked so slowly that Mother often admonished her to get a move on. Now Helena and my mother burst into the room where I had just bashed my doll carriage into the wall, angry at having missed the tricky curve. That sucker, Helena whimpered. Don't beat me, it's not my fault. My mother, who never would raise a hand to anyone, shushed her. Shh, be still. I must have glanced at the window. Mother moved towards it. Oh, leave it there, it's for the stork, I wailed. Gott im Himmel, the whole month, Helena lamented, as my mother retrieved the strictly rationed kilo of sugar. The stork needs only 1 sugar cube, Mother explained. But you may have 2. The rest goes back to the kitchen. My brother Roland was delivered on August 15th, 1942. A week later, the baker's wife had a baby boy. It worked, you see. 2 sugars, 2 babies. All right, how are we doing on time? Shall I go on?
Excellent. At this moment, does anyone have any questions or any comments? Feel free to type in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, you're very welcome to do so. We're doing wonderful on time. If you'd like to continue, it's wonderful. If you want to do a few more excerpts, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. I can take you to 1950 and take you on a sea voyage.
Sure.
It's chapter 11, and it's called America, and it takes place in 1950. After waiting 5 years for a place in the quota to emigrate, we had received our visas and our papers, and we were allowed to take ship. My aunt in Chicago paid for the passage. America. The SS Washington, built as a transatlantic luxury liner, had served as a troop transport during World War II. As of 1946, she was a passenger ship again. Our voyage was a new experience for all 3 of us. This is my mother, who's got divorced, and my brother and I. It remained the only ocean crossing we would make by ship. future transatlantic trips would be made by plane. The ship carried more than 1,000 passengers, most of them immigrants. That was more people than my brother and I had ever seen in one place, and the ship was larger and busier than any building we knew. By the second day, the view from the deck was all water, greenish-gray waves and swells with frothy white crests, under a sky that was a darker gray. A faint blue line marked the horizon. I knew the powerful engines were moving us forward, but I was not prepared for all the other motions, up, down, sideways, as the vessel pitched and rolled in the choppy sea. I had enjoyed supper on our first evening on board and breakfast the next morning. I was impressed by the huge dining room, the white-jacketed stewards, the table settings and service, and the foods I did not recognize. Hesitantly using my school English, I had asked the name of the giant fruit, if it was a fruit, on my appetizer plate. Grapefruit, I was told. I said, thank you, but the answer did not help much. Fruit made sense, but grape did not. I stored the English vocabulary word in my mental dictionary. Walking around the deck now on this frigid November morning, my stomach began to feel uncomfortable. The queasiness got worse by the minute. I asked Mother and Roland to come back to the cabin with me so I could run into the bathroom. We got there just in time, using ropes strung in the corridors to help us stay upright as the ship pitched and tossed. Mother said it was only a little bit of seasickness and it would pass. It wasn't a real illness like the measles. The cabin was warm and stuffy, and after I vomited, we went back up. Mother said fresh air was the cure. Breathing in the sharp, salty smell did help, but its invigorating effect lasted for only a short time. Unfortunately, this bit of seasickness haunted me for the entire voyage. I was miserable. Luckily, Mother and Roland fared better and ate their meals while I hung over the rail feeding the fishes. Mother made friends with a group of merry Bavarians, half a dozen adventuresome young men and women striking out to seek their fortune in the new world. Prevention and cure for nausea was beer, they claimed. They began drinking at lunch and kept refilling their beakers for hours afterward while they strolled around the deck. Have a sip, it'll settle your stomach, poor little thing, they offered when they came by. Mother did not forbid it. She was willing to try anything that might help. Sadly, the surefire Bavarian miracle did not cure me. I took walks with a jolly band, but frequently had to be escorted back to the cabin so I would not disgrace myself in public. It was a no-win situation. The warmth indoors was a relief from the cold of the deck, but the nausea increased. Fresh air was definitely better, but it was also freezing. The North Atlantic in winter is a hostile environment. I wanted to die. After 7 days, including a hurricane-force storm on the last night of the voyage, we finally sailed into New York Harbor. Passengers crowded onto the upper deck to look at the Statue of Liberty and cheered when the lady came into view. There she stood, rock solid on a massive stone pedestal. More than anything in the world just then, I wanted a firm piece of ground under my own feet. Later, when I learned the poem inscribed at the base of the statue, I added wretched and tempest-tossed to my vocabulary list. I knew exactly what they meant. Mother's younger brother, Gus, met us when we left the Washington, helped with the luggage, and drove us to his house in Hoboken, New Jersey. I missed all the joy of the reunion. I missed dinner and most of the train trip to Chicago. I was dazed, weak-kneed, and asleep within minutes of setting foot on American soil. When we reached Chicago the next day and were greeted by my Aunt Mary and her husband, my mother's sister, I had revived enough to hear Mother say, "I was afraid I would arrive with only one living child. Thank God she's better now." Aunt Mary and Uncle Anton welcomed us warmly. Aunt Mary looked like Mother, but she was taller and plumper. Her husband was tall and wiry and wore glasses. He spoke in a calm voice. Both were immigrants who had worked hard to realize their own American dream. They had served as janitors in the house they now owned, saving their wages to pay off the mortgage. In addition to the house, which was in a tidy middle-class neighborhood on the north side, they owned a small factory that made components for major manufacturers, such as Bell & Howell, makers of camera equipment and office machines. They assured us we could stay with them until we learned English and become financially independent. We were taken to 2 comfortable bedrooms on the 2nd floor. One of them had belonged to their son, who had married the year before. He and his wife now lived in an apartment nearby. There was a bathroom just for us. Roland and I had never seen a bathtub with a shower in it, and hot water ran instantly. In Dachau, we had heated bath water on the kitchen stove and poured it into a metal wash tub where it stayed scalding hot for the first few minutes and then went cold in the next few. Here you could mix water to the desired temperature. What luxury. We spent a few days settling in and catching up on family news. My aunt and uncle spoke German with each other and with us, but Roland and I were instructed to say aunt and uncle. It was important to get used to English. Aunt Mary invited some American neighbors to meet us. She served an ample meal as we sat at her beautifully appointed dining room table. The main course featured large portions of meat called steak. In Germany, each adult helping would have kept us for a week. Chicago was famous for beef, we were told. It had huge stockyards and supplied meat to the rest of the country. I did my best to answer questions in English, but I was stumped when one of the guests asked if I was a southpaw. I stared, bewildered. Left-handed, the visitor added, not helping me much. No, I replied, holding up my right hand, this hand. Another guest understood the situation and explained it. I was eating as I had been taught in Germany, holding the fork in the left hand and the knife in the right, using both without putting them down. In America, this guest said, we ate differently. He demonstrated, and I did my best to follow. Hold the fork in the right hand, put down the fork, switch it to the left hand, pick up the knife in the right hand, cut meat, put knife on edge of plate. It seemed clumsy, but I practiced until I got it. Roland, who had trouble telling his left hand from his right, watched completely baffled. Mother took pity on him and cut up his meat. Uncle Anton went to his factory in the industrial section of town every day. Aunt Mary took us for walks to familiarize us with the neighborhood. Her home was 3 stories high, built of red brick. It looked very similar to all the neighboring homes on Magnolia Avenue, as the street was called. Aunt Mary said magnolia was a flowering tree that grew in the American South. I asked if the trees along the curb were magnolias, but I was told they were not. Chicago winters were too harsh. Unlike the streets I knew in Dachau and Ettlingen, where my great aunt lived, this avenue ran very straight, as did the others that met it at exact right angles a short distance away. I learned that each square enclosed by 4 streets was called a block. Each block we walked along was lined with sidewalks and at intervals tall poles bearing lamps at their tops. When we returned from our walk in the early winter dusk, all the lights were shining brightly. Years ago, Mother had said peacetime meant lighted streets. Now she said how easy it would be to find our way home. And it's safe, Aunt Mary added. The children will be fine going to school. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good place to
That's
stop.
fantastic.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
I'd just like to ask before we end if anyone has any questions, final thoughts, or if you would like to type anything in the chat, please do. We have a few very positive comments, a lot of thank yous in the chat. Was a fantastic talk as well as reading, and we wish you the best with the book. And East Hampton Library has a copy of the book in the collection, as well as the earlier works of poetry. And let's see, we have some more comments. Andrew says, thank you very much. Laura, thank you for writing this.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I love your observations and details from a child's point in the earlier chapters. Um, I'd like to thank you for being able to do this wonderful presentation. And we will we'll take tonight's recording and just add title to the beginning, and we'll place it on the East Hampton Library's YouTube page, which is EHAMLIB, and it has all of our various recordings of different programs, of author events, lectures, as well as some of our children's and young adult programs, going back for quite some time. So I'd like to thank everybody for zooming in this evening, and I'd like to thank Barbara for this presentation, and I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Good.
And
I cannot thank you enough, all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor.
thank you. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.